Hey, how's it going and welcome to another video. So a while ago I put up a video talking about like hot takes and kind of just how people like present their opinions on the internet. I'm actually recording this one immediately after that, but in that video there was a certain little snippet that I really wanted to elaborate on more, and that's just the concept of like things being appreciated over time, and just a bit of advice that I'd kind of like to impart onto people, and that's the thing that you like right now, which maybe isn't the most popular. Give it a few years and people's opinion on it will probably be more in line with yours. So this is just a sort of habit of like discussion around things that I've noticed for, God, the better part of 15 years at this point. This goes by many different names, but I think what most people are probably the most kind of familiar with is the concept of like the Zelda cycle. For anybody who doesn't know, the cycle essentially goes like this. New Zelda game comes out and everybody says it's a masterpiece. It's the pinnacle of the series. Zelda is saved. Oh man, what an amazing video game. Then after giving it another year or so, people are like, oh, that game wasn't that great. It was kind of overrated, actually. I was never crazy about it. Then give it a bit longer, and suddenly it's, this game sucked. What were they thinking? Can Zelda ever recover? Then another few years go by and it's like, man, you remember that? That game was kind of underrated. I don't know why people give it so much shit. And then another few years later, it's, that game was a masterpiece. What an amazing title. If only they made the Zelda games like that one. I have seen this cycle repeat itself many times. And lo and behold, it seems like the cycle has kind of come full circle in a way. Like, even though you obviously still see a lot of people shitting on Skyward Sword, I think I see like almost as many people now saying how much they love Skyward Sword, how much they thought it was like really underrated, how they like this and that, and how they're really happy about the HD version or whatever. And it's like, oh fuck, the Zelda cycle is always true. Like, beyond just Zelda, I think you can really apply this to almost any series. Like, Pokemon is a pretty good example. Gen 5 is definitely the one that comes to mind the most. Like, when Gen 5 came out, I think everybody, at least everybody that I kind of interacted with was like, yeah, Gen 5 sucks. Like, all these Pokemon are shit. I don't like this game. Then flash forward 10 years later, it's not uncommon to see people say that Gen 5 is like, that was the peak of Pokemon. That was their favorite game. It had the best this, the best Pokemon. And it seems like inevitably, no matter how much things are kind of determined to be like, this is the bad one, inevitably people's opinions on the shit start to like slowly change over time. And I think a lot of that really just has to do with people kind of getting older. You know, if you were fucking, I don't know, 10 years old when you played Pokemon Black and White, suddenly now you're a 20-year-old, right? Suddenly now you're the old boomer who's complaining about how bad the series is now, how all these new Pokemon suck, and how back when you grew up with these games, oh man, that was some good shit. Like, the cycle just repeats itself kind of infinitely. And I think another kind of aspect of it is just like, people who don't like something, they end up kind of getting bored of not liking it, if that makes sense. And they also probably just get outnumbered. Like, honestly, that's a large part of just like internet discussion, is how many bodies you can throw at a discussion. But I bring the topic up because I think it is very easy to kind of get discouraged about your enjoyment of stuff. Like, Lord knows it's happened to me. The internet is a brutal, shitty place sometimes. And it is very easy to feel like, oh man, I guess this thing that I really like, just everybody doesn't like it, I guess. But something that kind of like reassures me in a way that like, my enjoyment of stuff isn't wasted. It's just like looking back at repeated history and realizing that eventually the stuff that I really like, even if right now it's not the most hottest thing ever, in time it will be appreciated, and suddenly it will become that hidden gem, or man, it was underrated, or why did people not like this so much? Obviously, your mileage may vary with this kind of stuff. Like, I think people are always gonna kind of be in this state of mind where like, the thing that you like, it feels like everybody's kind of against it. Since for people, bad stuff just tends to kind of stick in our heads longer. Like, you're not really gonna remember the nice, fine conversation you had with a guy about, like, your favorite character or whatever. But that dude who called your waifu overrated garbage, like, oh man, you remember that guy, don't you? But I think at least when it comes to me and my kind of like, I don't want to say field of expertise, because I don't know fucking jack shit about what I'm talking about really, but, you know, I'll tell this story until the day I die, and nobody can convince me of anything else. Back in the day, I'm talking like, you know, 2011, 2012 kind of era, all the way up until around 2016, Persona 4, it was just the coolest thing to shit on that game. Persona 4, man, that baby game, it's too happy. It's nothing like the rest of the series. Like, oh man, I can't wait for Persona 5 to come out and for it to be dark and for it to actually be good, and then we can get away from happy anime bullshit. And that was kind of just the narrative for years and years and years. And then Persona 5 came out, and at least from my immediate recollection, like, obviously there were people who pretty immediately didn't like it, but it felt like there was at least a year of kind of sort of peace of, like, most people generally saying, like, yeah, it was pretty good. And then once people decided Persona 5 was, in fact, the worst video game ever made, some wizard cast a spell, and mysteriously, Persona 4 was pretty good again. A lot of people started talking about how, like, man, I miss Persona 4. At least it's not like 5. And so it kind of felt like the table kind of flipped. It was like, yeah, Persona 4, that game sucks. I can't wait for Persona 5. It's going to be great, da-da-da. And then Persona 5, after, you know, a year, 2 years of it being out, it was like, I miss Persona 4. Like, fuck Persona 5. Like, what? Persona 4. And I bring it up because, like, I guarantee you, heed my fucking words. Give it another, like, maybe not 5 years. Give it another 7 years, yeah. Or you know what? Give it until Persona 6 has been out for a year. And I can kind of guarantee you, Persona 5 will suddenly be like, man, Persona 5, it was actually pretty good, you know? I think a large part of that really just has to do with, like, a recency bias in terms of, like, this is kind of just, like, a human thing where, like, we tend to spend a lot more time analyzing the most recent thing. Because, you know, that's just the one that came out recently. That's the one that everybody's talking about. That's the one that's kind of new and fresh. So, obviously, that one's going to end up getting a lot more criticism. And over time, I feel like people tend to, like, either forget or kind of just stop thinking about why the thing was perceived of as being bad to begin with. Or they kind of take the other approach where they're just like, well, that was all actually good. And I think for a lot of people when it comes to stuff, it really is just, like, nostalgia bias. People I've noticed have this really weird tendency, and I'm the same way, to, like, reflect way better on stuff from the past, even if it was kind of shitty. Like, for example, I worked at a grocery store 5 years ago, and even though I was constantly miserable, I hated it, I wanted to quit so badly, some weird part of my soul kind of looks back on those times with, like, a certain level of fondness. It's way easier to stop and just be like, yeah, all that bad stuff, like, that was bad, but remember the good? And that's kind of just how people are when it comes to, I feel like, basically their entire existence is like, the past was better. Right? Like, things were better back then. And how much of that just has to do with, like, the fact that you were literally a child and weren't capable of, like, thinking about shit as much? Or if things legitimately were better, like, either way, it's just a lot easier to look back on the past with more fondness than the present. Because the present sucks. Like, oh man, I got so many bills to pay, I got this and that. Like, I was looking forward to this game coming out for 7 years and it sucks. Super Mega Video Game 6, that shit ruined my life, but Super Mega Video Game 4, man, they don't make them like that anymore. But yeah, I think it takes something being, like, really, really awfully bad to just be forever considered awful. And even then, I think there's always gonna be those people who are just gonna ask, like, was it really that bad? And I think I would also kind of take solace in the fact that most people, I think, tend to just kind of be quiet enjoyers. Even though it might feel like, oh man, the whole world just like, why do they hate this game that I like so much? Like, what you're seeing is all the angry people that are very vocal about their dislike of something. Usually somebody who just plays something and is like, yeah, that was good. They're kind of just gonna move on with their lives. Whereas somebody who really hates the thing is just gonna bring it up all the time and, like, never shut up about how, oh, it's so bad. And sometimes, honestly, it just takes people, like, a few years to, like, I don't know, feel safe about talking about the shit that they like. You know, to bring up Persona 4 again, I'm sure for a lot of people, it's just like, they always liked Persona 4, but anytime they brought it up, it was like, Persona 4, that game sucks. So after a while, they were kind of just like, alright, I guess I'll just, like, not. But yeah, I think when it comes to kind of, like, group consensus when it comes to shit, like, patience really is a virtue. Right now, it might feel like you can't bring up how much you like this thing without it being called doo-doo poo-poo. But give it 10 years, you know, mysteriously, a lot more people will be like, oh man, I always liked that game. I thought that game was kind of underrated, or that game was ahead of its time. It was so good. Like, Metal Gear Solid 2, it's a great example of a game that, like, even though I never played it when it released, like, it seems like generally people did not like that game. Nowadays, that game is pretty widely considered a masterpiece, so really just wait. Like, after a while, kind of nostalgia bias is gonna kick in. A lot of people who played it when they were younger, they're gonna grow up and suddenly they're gonna be like, yeah, that game was amazing, I love that game. And even though the most recent release of something is like, that thing sucks, wait for the next one. Like, seriously, just wait for the next game to come out. That one will be the worst game ever. fighting games are also a huge one when it comes to this. Like, I don't know how many of y'all watch Say Jam. There's probably not a huge amount of overlap between our audiences, but he talks a lot about, like, boomers and how every fighting game seemingly when it comes out is like, this game is dog shit. It is too simple. Fighting games are dead. This genre has no future. They just keep appealing to babies. Back in the day, these games were immaculate. And that's kind of just been the story of the fighting game genre for the past, like, 30, 35 years? Like, literally, I think basically every series ever has been like, yeah, back in the day, these games were so good, you know? And then new title came out, and that game sucked. 10 years later, when new title is suddenly old title, then it's like, man, that game was actually kind of good. It's better than new title. Like, that's kind of just the fucking story of, like, humanity, right? New thing bad, old thing was always good. So I would just take solace in this very weird sort of quirk of humanity. It's just that, like, you know, this thing that you like, you might get shit on for liking it now, but in time, your people will emerge triumphant. Everything is loved eventually by somebody. Might not be right now, might not be in 5 years, might not be even in 10 years, but eventually you're gonna be able to be like, I always liked that thing, and it's gonna feel pretty good. But yeah, that has been the video. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you guys next time.